Alright, so we're creating a router table in the side extension table of this Delta Unisaw here. This is per request of the buyer. So what I'm doing here is making a framework and a tabletop and the router plate insert, etc. And I'm basing this off of fine woodworking tools and shops from let's see what year this was, winter 2010. John White has an excellent design in here for a extension table on a table saw, and basically I'm using this basic design. I've created a grid and framework. So basically, just to give you an idea of what I've got going here, so far I've made the framework for the table and the rough top. And so I made the framework, the grid underneath, and then spaced the framework properly for the insert. And then I traced the insert on this 3/4 inch sheet of plywood, and I rough cut it out with a jigsaw. And then around the edges of the insert, what I did is screwed these 3/4 inch pieces of ply around the edges. And then I used a flush trim router bit to ride along these edges to get my nice clean edge all the way around so this insert fits right in. And I'm going to do a laminate Formica top here, so that's going to cover up this 3/4 inch plywood, but I did want to have a nice sturdy surface. This infinity plate looks excellent. It's very thick. It's got plenty of flush height adjustment screws, and also some screws along the edge to get this fit exactly right so it doesn't wiggle around in there. Really impressed with this. And then it's meant for this Triton router. These Triton routers are really designed to be mounted inverted in a router table. So this is coming along well. We'll have to do the laminate yet and mount the router and so forth and make a fence, but all in all it's coming good. Okay, so now we're putting the Formica, the laminate on top. I used the contact cement, followed the instructions on the can. And now I just drilled a hole into where this router plate's going to be, into the opening, and I'm going to use a flush trim bit to flush up the edges. I already did that on the edges here as well. Used the flush trim bit to get that as we should have it. So here we go. So I've plunged the router through the hole that I drilled. This is a flush trim bit with a bottom bearing. So the bottom bearing is running along the 3/4 inch plywood that's underneath this laminate, and then it's riding along the edge and cutting a nice flush edge on this laminate. It's a small diameter bit, which works well for laminate, less likely to crack and chip. And so I'm just working my way around here, and once we're done, there you have it. Now we're installing the extension table between the Biesmeyer rails, between the angle iron here, and I made a very tight fit, so I sort of shimmied that table between the rails and then clamped it at the proper height with parallel clamps. And now I'm pre-drilling the holes through the wood, and then I'm using the proper screws with some fender washers. And now we're going to drop the router in. Good to go. Okay, so the extension table with the router is all complete. This is a great infinity router plate here. All these flush adjustment screws, and then also some screws to really shim it against the edges if needed. My routered hole came out just perfect because the technique I used, so I don't really even need to use those, but that's a nice feature. And then there's different insert plates here to close this gap. So I'll just go around and flush it up with these flush adjustment screws, and then the router will be all set, ready to use here. I'll add some legs over here for some further support, and then we'll work on creating an auxiliary fence to hook to the Biesmeyer. The router table is done. This is again a router in a table saw extension wing, and so the last part I had to do here was the fence. So I created this sort of framework here, and then I added these little grooves to accept clamps F-style clamps and so forth. Anything with this sort of rectangular metal would fit into these grooves, and you can clamp it to the fence. And then these fences are tall enough to do vertical work as well. And then this middle section is removable, and you can make replaceable inserts that fit right in that spot if you would want to do zero clearance cutting. But for now, I just cut a big enough opening to accommodate all sorts of cutters. So there she is, all done. And again, this was modeled after Fine Woodworking Winter 2010-11. The router table that John White had a piece about here. Again, it's a pretty ingenious design, pretty efficient design, and it's mostly made from 3/4 inch ply, so not too hard.